It's Wednesday, the 14th of January, 2015. My name's Robin Yellow, and this is Ecotastic. And with me, Ecotastic, I should say, and with me is Kit Knowles.
Hello, everybody. It's been a while, hasn't it, actually? I think missed yesterday, and then... Yeah,
well, we had a bit of a false start yesterday. We were drunk again. No, to be fair, it was my fault, actually. I got the times wrong, so I booked in Ecotastic for Tuesday, as it normally is. But unfortunately, it didn't make its way into Kit's diary, so a bit of a snafu.
So I booked a little appointment with a friend and a bottle of wine. It was lovely.
Yeah, he did. That's right. Booked an appointment with a bottle of wine. You said it all. Okay. Well, shall we start with the news, Kit?
Sounds perfect.
Okay. Well, the first bit of news this week comes from Tree Hugger. Super insulated clothing could let you skip indoor heating. Now, with wearing extra layers inside is one of the easiest things you can do to reduce energy consumption during the winter, which helps the planet and saves you money. Researchers at Stanford University have figured out a way to apply silver nanowire coating to fabrics to make them super insulating, cutting down or even cutting out the need for indoor heating when worn. Now, the researchers say the main advantage of nanowire coated clothing is that it reflects over 90% of a person's body heat back into themselves, and in comparison, a warm wool sweater only reflects back about 20% of body heat.
Well, Robin, I personally believe that that's a bit of a false statistic on the basis that first of all, that's not really clear because there's three forms of heat transfer: convection, conduction, and radiation. And the word reflect is something that refers only to radiation, and radiative losses as a percentage of your total losses as a body at 37.5 degrees will not be the majority, it will be the minority. So I want to know if that means that 90% of the heat that you are losing as a person is being retained, or whether it's simply referring to 90% of the radiative losses being reflected, which would be a much smaller number overall. The other thing to note is that this concept has been around for a very long time. The first ones that came out were these little electric wires that are built into your clothing that run off a small battery pack that use a fraction of the sort of energy of any kind of electrical heating, and will keep you nice and toasty throughout pretty much any temperature. But there's lots and lots of issues with this. Firstly is the effect on the property and the occupants and anybody involved in the property. By maintaining a much lower temperature in there, you have all sorts of condensation related issues start to occur. If you keep your house below 16 degrees, you can see all sorts of condensation related issues spring up all over the place in all likelihood.
Yeah, but who actually keeps their house at less than 16 degrees?
Well, did you not read that sentence? They just made a claim that you could get away without heating your house at all.
Yeah, but your house isn't heated, and there's no way your house is 16 degrees in the winter. I mean, you've said yourself you don't turn your heating on.
Well, yes, but I'm presuming that they're doing this on the basis that it's a hell of a lot cheaper to get silver nanowire whatever insulated clothing than it is to fork out 100k on a eco refurb.
Well, in any case, I definitely want the silver one into my jumper, and that way I don't have to wear so much bling when I go out for a night out. Tree Hugger also reported this week on the news from Chevrolet that after the Volt, meet the Bolt, a 200-mile range EV that could sell for around $30,000. That doesn't always necessarily translate to pounds. Normally $30,000 means £30,000, but still that's actually quite cheap for an EV which will go 200 miles. Now they've shown off their car at CES, where there were a lot of cars shown this year. It looks very nice. It's a standard sort of four-seater hatchback, attractive to look at, but it's this 200-mile range, Kit, that is the key thing here. Now, I've seen a confidential report on battery technology which talks about lithium-ion being the main, obviously the current battery technology that's used, and there will be a big leap forward in 2020, 2025 to metal air batteries, which will give that double the range, half the weight. But until then, the only way that you're actually going to reduce the cost of vehicles is by making cheaper batteries, and it could be that Chevy is anticipating cheaper batteries here.
Well, there's the there's the VW option as well, where they've been doing I think it's called the X1, and their predominant, other than weight, is also the kind of coefficient of drag. So they're putting a hell of a lot of effort into reshaping the car and remodeling it so that you can greatly reduce the resistance as it's passing through the air. So that's another option in terms of increasing range. And there's quite a lot in technology of control of acceleration and all the rest of it. So one of the features that appears in a Prius that I think gives it about 10% boost on what it would normally get is it has this eco mode, and all it is a desensitization of the accelerator. So when you pop your foot on the accelerator, there's a delay before it gives you the power of sort of I think a quarter of a second or a half of a second. And on that basis, you can actually the kind of those of you who have a bit of a tick in your accelerator foot, it can iron out a few of the blips and really greatly reduce your usage there. So there are quite a few other combinations that you can pull together to give you other savings other than the two classics of weight and battery size. And also another battery technology that's being pushed, I mean, other than the ultracapacitors, which seems to be stalling as an idea, but one of the things that's coming out a lot in the kind of energy management side of things, and I'm not sure if that would be responsive enough for the vehicular market, but is titanium ion based systems. And that's quite interesting, because we're now getting batteries that we can buy where, if you compare it to sort of lead acid, we get 4 to 6 years in a cycle of sort of solar panels. You can now push this up to sort of 50 years with the titanium ion, and you can also much more significantly, you can drain the batteries to near zero without doing any kind of long-term damage, whereas lithium ion you can take to about 30 to 40, 35%, and lead acid you can't really go below 50 to 60% without, on a cycle, drain charge without sort of damaging it for the long term. So yeah, I think there's lots of battery tech. I mean, that's the future of the market. It really is, both energy in a wider scale and from a vehicle perspective.
So the quantum leap, as I said, I'm not sure quantum leap's the right word, because quantum is small, right? But the lurch forward will be when you half the weight and double the range, and this is the metal air technology. I've had it explained to me, and unfortunately I can't replay it without making any mistakes, so I'll try and find out more about that next time. But until then, really the only option is to get cheaper batteries and to manufacture batteries in a cheaper way. And one of the ways, in fact, Elon Musk is doing that is by just making AA cells, the sort of thing that you'd find in your laptop, taking a lot of the laptop market for lithium-ion batteries, and then taking those economies of scale and making cheaper cars out of them. Moving on, Clean Technica, a graphene compound, could revolutionize clean tech. And in the latest development, researchers at the University of Exeter have developed a graphene compound that could help resolve some of the problems with material commonly used in solar cells, PVs, and other clean tech devices. And they've called this Graph Exeter Kit.
Lovely name. Obviously related to Exeter by any chance?
I think there's a connection there.
University of Exeter, there you go. So so the idea is here it's a graphene, which is a conductive product, and it is transparent. I think I caught there. Obviously I haven't read through it, but I'm guessing that this is going to make up one of the layers in something like a PV
It's one
cell.
atom thick.
Yeah, so it's going to be lighter, it's going to be stronger, it's going to be more conductive, and it's going to be transparent, which is going to block out less of the sun's rays or enable greater absorption. I mean,
it says here it's a graphene. It's developed at the University of Exeter. The solution was actually developed in 2012. It's a graphene sandwich with 2 thick layers of graphene for the bread and a nice thick layer of ferric chloride molecules for the meat or veggies for you vegans out there.
Sounds good. So how's that integrated into PV, does it say?
It doesn't, but I just like the name Graph Exeter. Live Science Beta this week reported on the coolest eco-friendly technologies at CES 2015. Just want to go through a couple of these with you, Kit. The EcoATM. You put phones in and get cash out. So it encourages you to recycle all those rare earth metals that are in your old telephones.
Yeah, it's a good idea. I mean, one of the things that Tesco's have been doing for a while, not trying to big them up or anything, but one of the things they've been doing is a kind of electronics exchange program. And you can take some old sort of, I had an old monstrous Alienware computer, which I hadn't used in sort of 3 years. Dumped in some attic storage somewhere, and yeah, I think I got sort of 200 and something quid for it on this exchange. So there's plenty of really attractive to encourage recycling, and one of the biggest sort of most damaging elements, other than not recycling, but far worse than that, is putting sort of battery technologies in landfill that has serious issues with sort of land contamination and damage. So I think that EcoATM should be really expanded.
Well, according to this, the electronics that find their way into the EcoATM are actually taken apart and used for spares. Most of them are resold to new owners, a company spokesman said. Next on the list was the Automatic, which is something which plugs into the OBD port on your car. You can see that sort of here. And it gives you guidance through an application on accelerating, braking, going around corners too fast, and points make prizes. Good idea, Kit. You said you tried to acquire one of these and couldn't get one.
Yeah, I don't think this one in particular has some of the most advanced technology for sort of mapping and energy efficiency for the vehicle in terms of feedback, and also one of the things that came out this morning from Nest, which is a Google company, was that they are integrating the Automatic into their software. Which basically would mean your thermostat could learn about your movements and know when you're coming home. And on your way home, the thermostat would guess that you're wanting your house nice and warm, having kept it as cold as possible to save energy whilst you're out, and get it up to temperature again just before you step through the door, which is quite a nice idea. And that's one of many different sort of integrations that they're doing. So I think that's quite neat. But yeah, the Automatic, I believe, is still not available in the UK in terms of its support. I think you mentioned earlier there's some others on the market.
Yeah, there's quite a few as part of the work that I'm doing for my day job. I did some research into this driving style stuff, and there are several systems. Some of them plug into the OBD port, which is a kind of connector to the car's computer system, which is on most cars. Some of them are wired in or connected directly, hidden away under the dashboard for insurance purposes, for example. And they can give you all sorts of feedback, including gamifying it, so making it a fun game where you challenge yourself to drive in a more eco-friendly way and reduce your insurance at the same time. I'm going to move on to the next article here, because this one is entitled "Dirtier Than Coal: Why Government Plans to Subsidize Burning Trees Are Bad News for the Planet," and produced by these august organizations, the RSPB, Friends of the Earth and Greenpeace. So I'm expecting bio-greenwash, but it says the UK bioenergy strategy set a clear direction for future bioenergy policy, including commitments to only support sustainable bioenergy that delivers genuine greenhouse gas emission reductions. These principles are now being undermined by the government's proposals to continue to subsidize large-scale power generation from wood. What's it all about, Kit?
Well, I'm a little bit upset about it, really, because one of my biggest pushes in the industry for Joe Blogs out there is really to be moving towards a more biomass fired sort of fuel. When we're in sustainable managed woodland type situations, or in the case of Manchester, we have a lovely situation where we have a company called the Manchester Tree Station, and what they do is they recover all this waste that would normally go to landfill, which is sort of arboricultural waste, anything chopped out of parklands or avenues or gardens, any of that tree surgery that goes on in the city, which is extremely extremely extensive. All of that normally goes to the landfill. In Manchester, we have a lovely cooperative sort of community run that diverts all of this waste and processes it into firstly usable furniture at the top end, and then construction materials, and then logs, and then whatever's left over it chips. So it really uses just about every scrap, and that sort of form of sustainability turns biomass into pretty much the most convenient of all the eco situations that we've got going for fuel sources. And what these sort of works here are really pointing out is that there's lots of abuse out there. There's lots of woodlands poorly managed, lots of non-sustainable elements going on, and it's being fueled and driven through the kind of mass burning of large-scale sort of grid centralized development, and that's all true on one side, but to kill an industry or attempt to kill an industry on the basis of people who are misusing, which of course there's examples in every avenue of people misusing technologies, I think is a deep shame. So dirtier than coal, absolutely not. I mean, that's an atrocity of a conversation to start with, but yes, it can be abused. So wherever you get your wood from, try and look a little bit further, see if you can get something from sustainably managed woodlands.
Well, that's always the question, isn't it? Understanding where the stuff you're buying came from, where it was made, how it was made. I know that when you made your trip to Lithuania to look at your double glazing or triple glazing systems, you looked at every part of the manufacturing process to understand where everything was sourced and how it was made, the chemicals that were used. And I think often enough we don't ask those questions, we just want it cheap.
Yeah, it's taken actually. It was Estonia, and we took about three trips to actually bottom out the kind of supply chain and the life cycle analysis behind their products. And there were actually, out of about 25 products that they sell, there were 2 of them that we refused to sell as a company because they still don't have sustainable feedstocks for 2 of these products. So yeah, I think it's really important, and you can apply that same logic to a much wider source. Although you'll find very quickly that everybody who plays towards the kind of consumer capitalist behaviour will very quickly come unstuck in terms of hypocrisies around purchasing materials.
Okay, well, hypocrisy. Here's a man who is not a hypocrite. Bill Gates drinks water made from poo to prove new sanitation tech works. Now, this is what's called, and I'm going to find the beautiful euphemism here if I can.
Poo juice.
It is. That's what it is. So there's an enormous machine that takes sewage and produces clean water from it. And it's self-sustaining, produces its own power. From the methane to drive the machines to distill the water. I don't know if it's using reverse osmosis or what it's using, but it's certainly powered. Water from waste, it's called black water, that's the euphemism, has been a hard sell in many geographies in developing countries that Gates targets. There's an operational challenge in collecting the waste before it can be purified. But this thing just basically straps on top of a sewage treatment plant and produces clean water from it. Now, what was so significant about him drinking it? I'm going to run the video, Kit, while you tell us.
Well, basically, these sorts of technologies have existed for a long time, and with enough money input and energy input, you can quite easily, turn anything into anything else. It's when you're talking sort of the chemistry of water, it's relatively simplistic, and the separation of it from other streams of mixed waste is very simple. So brilliant engineers, I would probably suggest not. But their difference here is, first of all, it's got Bill Gates as a front man. Secondly, it's got the Bill Gates Foundation as sort of money support, and so I would suspect that with that sort of machine behind it, it's going to make a big difference, because this really is a great technology. It's just never been sort of commercialized, spread out, and obviously they're doing it on the basis of targeting the developing countries first, which is absolutely ideal. And on a similar front, there is a company in the UK who is currently developing a system. They're called Viking Houses. I think they're one of the largest sort of prefab timber frame housing companies, and they are developing a technology in conjunction with many other people, universities, etc., which is, again, it's a black water technology which is developing power to feed back into the house, sort of an excess of power.
Here it comes. Here it comes. He's poured the glass of water. The water has been poured. And there it is. Look at the look on his face. Do it, Bill. There it goes. Yeah, that's right. Yeah. He throws up very shortly after that. Great. Finally, a story about goats in America. I read this in the BBC News magazine. About a man in the US who had got some goats in to sell goat meat in Washington, in the United States, and struggled to find a market for the goat meat. So we thought, well, we can't sell them for meat, so we started using them around the property on some invasive species. So in the UK we have a problem with something called Japanese knotweed, which Kit can tell you about in a minute, but they have one. They have another one here, which the goats ate and just chewed their way through it. And you can see here from the article, you've got the lovely furry goats eating anything that look at and then down here we've got this sort of invasive weed here, which is called kudzu, and it's a fast-growing vine native to East Asia, which was first introduced into the US in 1876 as an ornamental plant that could shade porches. And it's obviously just grown very fast, and these goats chomping their way through the biomass there. Why are goats so good at converting vegetation into meat and milk?
Well, I mean, they are unfussy creatures with incredible sort of stomach chemistry that enables them to digest just about anything. Or if not digest it, just divert it straight out the back end, in and out, I guess. And it's interesting. This is not a new concept. I've not heard it done with goats before, although that makes complete sense. The old way of dealing with this back in, I'm thinking back as far as the Middle Ages, sort of clearing areas, managing invasive species, and keeping consistent sort of environments and sort of biospheres have been pigs. Recently, for my woodland, I've got Himalayan balsam issue in the woodland that I've just purchased. And I've been looking at getting Berkshire pigs, which are a woodland. There's Tamworth as well, but the Berkshire is a specific...
Berkshire? Have you gone to America as well? Isn't it Berkshire?
Sorry, Berkshire. Berkshire pigs. And they've been specifically, in the past, specifically used for catering for sort of invasive species, and they thrive really well inside a woodland, and they will chomp through all my Himalayan balsam and produce lovely amounts of beautifully tasting meat, and also try and revive a sort of a losing species as well. It's on the rare breeds list. So yeah, I think there's plenty of scope for reintroducing animals as a controlling factor for all sorts of environmental issues that we're seeing, and that's actually can be expanded even further. I don't think we've mentioned it actually, but if any of you get the opportunity, do get on TED Talks and watch the one by now what's his name, let me just check what it is, but he is a fantastic guy who focuses his effort on reversing desertification by using sort of livestock like cows. His name is Alan Savary, or Savory, I think it's Savary, and he has developed techniques to very intensively farm cattle to create large amounts of meat, whilst entrapping huge quantities of carbon on the scale of actual sort of environmental engineering, you know, where people talk about these sort of sequestering CO2. This is the guy who I think is the closest to having any kind of real solution. And at the same time, for all the meat eaters out there that would love to be eco but cannot imagine a life without a bit of meat, he's proposing you get lots more meat whilst doing massive favours for the environment. So get yourself on this TED Talk that Robin's showing up here now.
Great. I'm not actually going to play that. We'll do that next time. Alan Savary, for the record. I'd like to now move into Tech Corner, Kit, if that's all right, after my puff piece on goats. Back to my favourite newspaper, the Mail Online, which is talking about a real powerhouse. Eco homes that come complete with heated pool and sauna and produces 3 times more electricity than it needs. Now, this may look like a porter cabin that's been involved in a nasty accident, but the slanting roof here is actually designed to house the ultimate eco home. Now, it was designed in Norway's research centre on zero-emission buildings and architecture firm Snorhete, producing more than 3 times more energy than it needs, built in Larvik, Norway. This prototype could be one of the homes of the future. Now, it covers 150 square meters, and it uses solar panels to produce electricity. I'm just going to pop this up on the screen there.
You're going to have to teach me some of that Norwegian one day, Robin.
That's very impressive. Yeah, I've been working with a few Norwegian companies recently. You pick up on the cadence. It is lovely to listen to, and I don't do it justice. Now, you can see here, if I just scroll down a little bit, can you see this, Kit? You've got this kind of description of the technology that's in the house, and there are a couple of things in here I thought we could just take a look at. Now,
should we start with that sloping roof that you mentioned? I mean, the first thing to note, and this comes back to the shed in your garden, your studio in the garden, flat roofs are inherent issues. They have higher costs and much higher levels of maintenance and much lower levels of durability, and that's irrespective of from the good to the bad on the cladding front. Now, mono pitches are not only the best in terms of all of those points I mentioned, but they're also the cheapest, and they're the most thermally efficient because they have the least number of seal points. Because of course the traditional sort of duo pitch that you see on all the houses, that has even more seal points. It has 2 triangle gables on either end and a ridge line at the top, and then 2 soffits.
By seal points you mean the point at which
the perimeter,
folds, where it can actually leak.
Where you need to connect it to another point on the building. So roughly speaking, with a mono pitch, it just has the 4 sides of a square or rectangle.
Well, it's basically a flat roof at an angle, isn't it?
On an angle. And so that super simple concept makes it much higher performance when all's said and done, when you account for things like the inefficiencies of installation and contractors. So that's the first.
Now we've got this rainwater collection coming off the roof here.
Yeah, well, also the angle gives you the ability to mount PV cells ideally. So you can see that their roof slope at 19 degrees. Well, that's different because they're in Norway, slightly different latitude, and that needs a slightly different angle to ours. But you can optimize your roof pitch for PV tech, for collection. And then they're obviously using it as a large surface area to collect water, which they're using for rainwater collectors. And as the technology goes, rainwater collection is relatively difficult to make work cost effectively. So I actually have it at my house, and it's actually something I wouldn't do again. I'd focus my efforts on grey water recycling. But if you go back to that picture, Robin, we can talk about they talked about atrium as a good source of daylight.
Yes. Now it talks about thermal mass stabilizes the temperature. What's that referring to?
Well, okay, so there's,
because this is an open area here. If you actually go up, this is actually exposed to the elements.
Yeah, so the first thing I'd note is that the problem with eco buildings is if you're being very purist about your sort of passive design, you want basically a box with a monopitch on the top, and that's not exactly an attractive system. So what they're doing here is actually adding quite a lot of architectural intrigue, which I like. They're also trying to use it as a light well, which is a big issue. If you've got a big box, the very center of that box generally stays quite dark, so we have to use fancy tech like optic fibers or sun pipes, and they're getting around it by chopping the middle out of the house. The only issue with that is obviously your surface area to volume ratio goes up considerably. You now have a big chunk which is seeing the outside directly on the other side of the wall cut into your house on 3 sides there. So it's not quite ideal from that perspective, but hey ho. The other thing they're talking about there is
you can see the whole roof is covered with PV, and I presume this is solar thermal down here, is it?
Yeah, that looks about right, because obviously they'll be using the solar thermal predominantly to run that swimming pool of theirs, which, by the way, there's absolutely no eco form of swimming pool. But anyway, the thermal mass idea is that with these sort of typically timber frame lightweight structures, you have a potential for quite considerable fluctuations in temperature. And so 2 concepts that are very important are decrement delays with decrement factors, which we won't go into. It's a bit higher level, but thermal mass is relatively simple to explain in that you have, if it's lightweight, then if the temperature changes outside, then as the temperature changes inside, it will fluctuate quite significantly. Whereas if you have a large amount of thermal mass, which obviously they've made this kind of masonry core to their property, heat can go into that masonry during the day when you don't want too much heat.
That's this here, where you've got these kind of bricks.
Yes, and it will then release it overnight, a bit like a hot water bottle when you want it the most. So it stabilizes that fluctuation or that oscillation in temperature internally. So that's what thermal mass is about, and it's a very important sort of key factor when you're doing passive design.
Now, what about this here? It says, well, this was quite interesting, radiant floor heating heats the house, and it says 1 radiator on each floor can heat the whole house, and that echoes your experience in your own house, doesn't it?
Yeah, so I mean, effectively, passively, as the house improves, gets better and better passively in terms of your new build design, you don't really have any excuse not to do a very, very good sort of passive performance, because you've got a blank canvas, and you're starting sort of with any possible specification you want. So it's relatively easy and cheap to achieve quite high passive performance, and as you do so, the heat losses from that house reduce to the point where even if you've got a singular source of heat, if the heat loss from the sort of furthest reaches from that source of heat is slower than the heat gained from it, then you can create a very stabilized temperature, and it's temperature gradient within your property that gives people the kind of feeling of discomfort. So that's how we've managed to get to the point where we don't use gas to heat our house. We can just light up a single or 2 wood-burning stoves, and between them we can produce enough heat energy to create a very consistent temperature across the whole house, which is lovely and comfortable too.
Well, I'm not going to play any more of that. I think we've done enough of that. How do photovoltaic panels work? Well, we'll do that on another show. Have we got time to look at the power router kit?
Sure. I mean, this keys in a lot with the battery technology that you were looking at earlier for the cars, and I was talking about the titanium oxide. You can get all sorts of titanium ion. You can get all sorts of different battery techs that you can strap to this system, which is basically a cloud-based energy management system. The main thing to bear in mind when you're looking at PV panels is they've got a few issues. Firstly, in the UK, the feed-in tariff, the way it works is that all the energy you're producing, you'll only be consuming a fraction of that in your home, and it's typically about 15% of everything you produce on your roof you consume in your own home, which means 85% of it you're feeding back to the grid. Now, the way that the feed-in tariff works, it's not a measured example in terms of what's being fed back to the grid. They assume that you feed 50% of it back, which firstly is the big six screwing you out of the difference between 50 and 85%. So they're pocketing 35% of the energy for free. Secondly, if you fed them 1% instead of 85%, they'd still pay you the 50%. So what you can do with an energy management system is that you get incredible control over what's going on in your house, incredible visualization from anywhere from your mobile, from Alaska to Australia, and you can be controlling what's going on to a certain degree. But most importantly, you can be transforming that figure so that you can be consuming anywhere between sort of 70 and 100% of all the energy you're producing on your roof. You can consume in your house. You feed them back nothing. You still get paid for feeding back an assumed 50%. And every kilowatt that you consume directly that you don't need to buy from the grid, you make another 15.5 pence for. So you can, which by the way is comparative to 4.2 pence, which is what the grid pays you for an assumed kilowatt fed back. So it's a win-win-win situation. I absolutely love energy management, and I don't think PV should be installed without it. I think it's an essential tool for the future.
Now, when we last spoke, Kit, you were having some issues with your power router battery backup. Did you ever get those resolved?
Still in the process. I'm trying to not just do a quick fix, sort of wham bam, thank you man. I'm trying to fully analyze it. They've gone back to the lab to understand what's going on, to see whether or not it's the battery or whether it's not the whether or not it's the battery control sort of algorithm held within the power router. So it's not a flawless technology, but I do believe it's an important one, and we'll see developments going forwards. I think that the most likelihood is that it's a bad commissioning job, and that the correct you have to obviously commission the energy management system to conform to the exact battery systems used with it. And obviously I went for tried the cheaper battery systems, because most people will.
That's so the lead acid system rather than the ion system.
Yeah, there's two forms of sort of lead-based system that's used in PV scenarios. One is called AGM, which is a sort of a matrix system, and the other's a gel system. And I went for the AGM, and I am obviously not fantastically impressed by it, but at the same time, it's still something that I'm very keen on in sort of in theory. And the easy solution to it is that there's pretty much no problems associated if you go for a serious battery tech like the lithium ion, or even more extreme, you can get to these titanium, I think, titanium-based systems.
Titanium. If it's titanium, Kit, it must be good. We're out of time, I'm afraid, but that looks really good. We've spoken about Power Router before. I'd love for us to do some little videos of your stuff, for you to make some videos that we could flash up during the show.
Yeah, it would be good.
We said we were going to do it last year, and then we never did it.
Well, busy folks, you and I, doing all this for free.
Exactly, for the love of it. For the love of it. Yeah. Well, that just about wraps it up. If you've got time, go and look at our subreddit at ecotastic.reddit.com. If you're watching this on YouTube, feel free to give us a little cheeky +1 or tell your friends. We aren't looking to monetize or make money, so Google doesn't actually promote our video. We're doing it for the love and to give you some information. If you've got any home stories about technology that you've put into your home, or things that you've done to improve your eco lifestyle, please share them with us in the comments, and we will use those to inform the discussions and debates that we have every week. Kit, thank you so much for this week.
Thank you, Robin.
Thank you so much, and I hope you recover. It sounds like you've got a bit of a cold going on there.
Yeah, a bit of a stonker.
Or was it that appointment with a bottle of wine?
Oh, no.
We will never know. So that wraps it up from me. Goodbye from me, Robin Yellow.
And goodbye from me.
And we'll see you next week on Tuesday, back to the regular time. Okay, bye.